All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Evie Lupine, and we are back once again with the delightful Pup Amp. And we're going to be talking about some asexual hot takes on the internet. I have compiled quite the list of stereotypes as well as some viral asexuality moments, a few historical things I've never covered on the channel, and we're going to just talk about them and share some things. So we have actually collabed together many a time, but for people that aren't familiar with you, Amp, or with your channel, would you like to let people know what you do?
Absolutely. Hi, my name's Amp or Pup Amp on the internet. I help to run the YouTube channel and all other conglomerate things under What's the Safe Word. But we try to make sex less scary for people on the internet. We talk about polyamory, we talk about kink related things, and because I am demisexual, we do talk about asexuality every once in a while. So thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting to me just how many kink YouTubers are on the ace spectrum. We got like quite the little we got the market cornered. All the
Well, not just YouTubers though, like just educators in general, I feel
Yeah.
are definitely on that ace spectrum a little bit more often.
I
Why do you think
wonder
that
what that
is?
correlation is. Like one day, it's like when you find out that like you know how there's like a disproportionate number of people that play professional sports who are left-handed. I feel like it's oh, if you didn't know that, that's like I think it's for some sports. I don't think it's for all of them. But I
I
definitely read
didn't,
that before.
but I am left-handed, and that explains why I'm such a
Me
jock.
too. Wait, maybe there's a correlation with being left-handed too. That'd be nuts.
I think the correlation there for most sex educators kind of being more on the ace spectrum
Mhm.
is just being conscious of and aware of different types of sex and how people work personally.
Yes.
Because I think a lot more people, as they grow into their older age or they grow into their
Mm.
kinks, I find a lot more often people are like talking about how they need to have emotions to be invested in someone sexually after they've gotten into the real kink realm. And then I lean in and I'm
Mm.
like, have you ever heard of a demisexual? And then they go, what's that? And then give them like
Yeah.
a week or two to do their own research. And they're like, I think maybe I'm gonna try this on, you know?
Yeah. I mean, but that's why education like this is so important is because both those individual interactions, but also people like watching content, listening to podcasts, you never know what that little nugget's gonna be. That's gonna get someone being like, maybe we should research this a little bit more. It sounds like me, or it sounds like my partner, or it sounds like somebody I know in my life. And then suddenly personal revelation, everything starts to make sense. So what I want to talk about first here is we have a list of what I'm gonna call like I think I have 7, like the top 7 asexuality hot takes slash like misconceptions or stereotypes that people have. And something I don't think I've covered on my channel before, and this used to be quite prominent in like Tumblr Pride discourse, which is it's gonna be May. We're coming up on Pride Month so soon.
PTSD
Oh,
already.
how I know it's like I'm excited, but also like at the same time. It's a very it's like a sweet and sour experience. But the first one is the A in LGBTQIA plus stands for ally slash in general because we're sort of moving away from using that longer abbreviation. Being ace doesn't make you queer. Like you don't qualify to join the club if you're only asexual. Usually this goes along with some belief about like asexual people don't experience oppression, you know, not wanting to have sex doesn't make you special. Like that's sort of the way that people talk about it when this comes up.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, A stands for asexual. We
Mhm.
like let's clear that up. And while
Mhm.
allies are absolutely allowed at Pride, yeah, the allies are not. That's not what the Pride is about. The LGBTQIA plus acronym includes those of us who are part of that queer community because we do face some duress or hardship because of who we are and how we love, or who we
Mhm.
love in many cases. I think that's the easiest one to dispel, though. That's usually just a grammatical error that people jump into because they're like, oh, A, ally. When in fact, a very clear, like, slippery slope that can be made by people who are trying to do bad, harm to the community. But
Yeah,
no.
I think I've seen that people run into that where you get like a sort of a corporate like pride inclusiveness of like for Pride Month, we're doing a little infographic on our Facebook page about what the letters of LGBTQIA are. And like somebody made a mistake somewhere and just, oh, A, that's probably ally. We're just gonna toss that one in there. And then it gets repeated and people believe that to be it. And like that's what it is supposed to be. And I've heard people debate historically about this as well, because like, well, how long we really use that term for? And ace people have been there regardless of whether or not like they were acknowledged as a specific thing. Ace people, we didn't just get invented 10 years ago. We've been around for a bit longer than that. And yeah, certainly people like there's this desire to make queer identity tied inherently to how oppressed you are or like how much other people don't like you. And I always found that to be kind of sad. Like, but like
We're only
hopefully we get
valid
to a
when we're
point.
upset. Like we're
Yeah.
only valid when there's distress of some kind.
Yeah. Which like I think that can be important for people that are going through that, to have a sense of community, people who understand what it's like to have people that don't support you. But that doesn't mean that we always need to base you're allowed to identify as this thing or this identity is allowed to be queer if it's, oppressed. And that's like what's the most important aspect of it, because that's hopefully going to be something with time we move away from being an inherent aspect of queer identity, if we do gain acceptance in a broader way, in a durable way, that won't be there. So no, sorry, just this pride month, if you happen to see any corporate slogans or infographics or banners or something, or maybe your local pride parade, they're doing something and they put ally in there. If you're not ace, maybe just go, hey, what about the asexuals? They're part of the A. They're also the A.
Hey,
Just,
Budweiser, LGBT does not stand for Let's Grab Beers, Queens. Did you ever see that?
Oh my god.
Did you see that
is
one?
Is that real? Is that a thing?
It was a real quote unquote real graphic that people sent to me when we were researching like corporate pride years ago.
Oh.
It was LGBT like TQ, and like they had said something like let's grab beers together, Queens, like LGBTQ. Yeah, it's part of that cringe, It's part of that cringe.
I'm grateful that asexual people have been under the radar, because I think we get to avoid a lot, at least to this point, a lot of the corporate like, hello, fellow kids, like type, we're relatable, buy our products. No one's at least so far. I'm waiting for the day when Target comes out with an ace pride related merchandise item, because I know it's gonna be bad, whatever it is. But then we'll have made it, and maybe it'll be a bittersweet moment.
I love it here.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. I'm ready for it. Okay, so moving on to some other common things that people will say. The second most common thing I will see is asexuals can't love. Like there's something about being asexual that makes you incapable of love, and or I think this is maybe more implicitly a belief that asexual love or asexual relationships are lesser. Because there's not that component of sexual attraction, maybe, to them.
To that, I would say, well, tell that to YouTube and my like if my video is monetized or not, because they still sexualize us, even if we're talking about a lack of sexuality,
Yeah.
So obviously there's a spectrum there, which you and I both know, but like people listening might not understand that, like between the asexuality of no sex or like allosexuality, which is usually like all sorts of sexual feels. There's a gray area in there of like the people who don't want any sex period whatsoever, nothing, and the people that are like hypersexual, if that's what you want to call it, or just that are able to experience and have sexual feelings. It's not with 0 or 1, like everything we talk about in most cases, there's a spectrum there. Which actually might be a good place to be like, where do we lie on this spectrum? Because you and I both lie on that ace spectrum. Like, how would you define your, if you feel comfortable, like love or ability to love in that regard?
Yeah. I remember when I was in college and I went to one of the first meetings of like one of the LGBT groups on campus, and like they gave us this like 1-page document to like help us understand like, oh, here's all the different ways that people can identify, like gender is a spectrum. And it literally had these little like gingerbread doll people with like little sliders you could pick where you fell on like allo versus asexual, and like I don't know how they set up gender. I don't know. I don't know if it was like binary versus non-binary, if it was like male, female, other. I don't remember how they did the gender part. It was probably lackluster. But like they had all these things you could identify with, but I don't remember romance being on it. And I really wish that it would have been, because I feel like that is certainly an aspect of all this. But for me, I definitely identify as like gray asexual is the label, so gray A. Like I'm sort of between allosexual and asexual. I occasionally fleetingly experience romantic or sexual attraction rather. With romantic attraction, I definitely like I'm very much a romance person. Romance is like my guiding thing in relationships. I like dating and being in love, and like I like platonic relationships too, but certainly like emotional romantic closeness is really important to me. And then like just general queerness is usually what I go for. Like I don't really resonate with like bisexual or biromantic or panromantic. I just feel like queer is probably the best way to describe it, especially because like the asexual label is normally what's more important for me when I'm talking to people. Because when people are like, "What romantic?" People don't even get that you can split between the two, that you can have a
Yeah.
separation there, and that's like a whole other new thing to introduce to people as a concept as well. So that's me. But how about you?
I'm definitely. I'm
Demi Lovato.
definitely demisexual in my sexuality. I'm a gay demi guy, is generally how I refer to
Mhm.
myself. But I say that I'm a gay guy first because demi confuses so many people, which is where I need to
Mm.
have that emotional connection before I have that sexual connection. And my
Yeah.
romance usually follows that line as well. Um,
Mm.
but and this is not me saying like I would not date someone who wasn't a cis gay guy. I just haven't found that person that kind of fits that gay energy, but demi
Mhm.
sexuality for me.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, when it comes to my aceness, like there are times where I'm like, oh, that person is an attractive person. But then I'm
Mm.
like, but I don't want to fuck said person. Not because they're a bad
Mm.
person, but I don't resonate with their vibe, their energy, maybe their sense of humor is off, or the way they kind of carry themselves through conversations or even treat people. That very much turns me off, It
Mm.
could be a number of those assets, but the second that when I say vibe, where the kids love that word, when I say the
Mhm.
vibe doesn't match, I very much am like not sexually interested in that person, you
Mhm.
know? And if that vibe turns off for me, sometimes it's very hard for me to turn it back on if it's someone that I might have had sex with at one point or had an energy with. But it's very much it can be turned off or on depending on my emotional standing with someone, if that makes
Mm.
sense. And that's such
Yeah,
a
like it's
frustrating thing to talk about. That is
yeah.
distressing to me.
Yeah, and it's like especially because so many people, I don't know what it's like in the like community with gay men, like how they handle conversations about that, but even like dating non-asexual people, whether it's like queer women, whether it's men, whoever, like there's almost always a like, how what like help me understand. Then there's almost always an understanding that like, well, but if you really like me, I'll be the exception. And it's like that's not like how it works for everyone. And for some people, if you're like more demi, right? Like for people, sometimes there is like, oh, when we have that special connection, there's this extra bonus material of interaction that is not accessible with like every relationship or every maybe person I know.
Yeah, the
It's
DLC
like
just
kind of
dropped.
yeah, new it's the sex DLC draft. Yeah. But I'm curious to know how like that how that plays out dynamic wise, because I know like my experience as a woman, occasionally meeting other people who are demisexual. Outside of that, most people are just not really familiar with it, or they sort of assume, which I guess is a whole stereotype by itself, is like demisexual means that you're being like picky, basically, slash it doesn't really
Oh,
exist.
yeah.
People just don't even, they're like, they don't think it's like a real sexual orientation. They don't really know how to handle it.
Yeah, for me, I find that because I live in San Francisco as well, so like there's a lot
Mm,
of gay, well, queer in general, but it's a very large populace of gay men here in the city because that was one of the major posts that not only military but people flocked to because it was seen as this gay mecca. So there's a lot of
mm-hmm,
sexually charged gay guys that would,
mm-hmm,
I'm sure, love to help me in that regard. For
mm-hmm,
me, I'm generally met with a lot of sexual energy from other people, and being a sex educator and a person who talks about sex all the time, my
mm-hmm,
deminess makes me very inquisitive and curious about people's sex lives. In a non like I want to have sex with you, but like if people start talking about it, I'm like, oh, tell me about that. I would love to hear more about that.
Mm.
Like, as a sexual person, I love talking about sex, but people have a hard time sometimes splitting talking about sex to let's have sex now, the action about
Mm.
sex. And I'm usually pretty good about distinguishing the two, but every once in a while, there will be this confusion of like, wait, but we're talking about sex. Why can we not have it? And I'm just like, oh, well,
Yeah.
I don't have, like, I'm not feeling sexually charged right now is the easiest way for me to dispel that. But then
Mhm.
if I have friends that like are conscious of my deminess, they'll be like, yeah, but why can't I like unlock that? You know, like why clearly we
Yeah.
both like each other and that might be true, but like that doesn't mean I want to have sex with you, even if I like you as a
Mhm.
person, you know? And that's a
It's like
confusing
almost
thing for
a
people.
yeah, it's like almost seen as an insult in a way. Like it's like, "Oh, you don't like me enough to do this thing that I wanna do." And it's like, "No, it's not a how much I like you. It's the vibe." Yeah, it's like the energy that's there and that's this is not gonna be there with everyone. And that's I am sad that people will take it as an insult. I think it makes it difficult to have certain connections with people when that's, how they view it. And just I don't know. I kind of want to give advice to people that are maybe on the opposite side of that. They're the people that maybe feel rejected when they have an ace or demi friend that's
Ooh,
not feeling the same way. Just like friendships are valuable, platonic connections are valuable, and I think the fact that we're always trying to like escalate things into like sex or romance doesn't give platonic connections the weight that they deserve because they are actually I meant to do more reading about this, but I haven't yet. I recently discovered Boston marriages. Have you heard of a Boston marriage before?
I've heard of things with Boston at the beginning of it, and it usually doesn't end well. Like
Well,
the
this is good. So I'm gonna open up Google real quick to make sure I
please.
don't like completely misrepresent this. But Boston marriages were non-traditional like domestic relationships between two wealthy women. And it was a way historically like in I would say the 1800s up until like the early 1900s for women to have relationships that did not involve men and like maintain their status in society. And I thought that was like really cool. How much it was like a cover for lesbianism versus like really deeply committed platonic emotional relationships between women who were just friends. Like I think there's probably going to be cases where you saw, some of both. But,
Absolutely.
hey, if you were in the 1800s, you can be somebody. Used to be back in the day, you could just live with your best friend and share all your money, and like everyone was just like, "Oh, they're in a Boston marriage." Like
They're roommates. They were
it's
roommates.
they were just roommates. They were just roommates. Sometimes you are just roommates, and that's okay.
Actually, to your question though about like advice to give people that might be after demi peeps or asexual
Mhm.
peeps at all, that might have that spectrum, like unlocking the different parts of someone does help closeness for some ace people or demi people.
Mm,
Ask
mhm.
questions about that person that are more deep than just like wanna fuck. You know, ask questions about the person's interests, what
Yeah.
they like to do, what they do as a hobby. Like once you get a demi person really like giving you all those deep seated like details about the things they enjoy, that helps to build closeness. Obviously, don't ask if you're not
Mhm.
actually interested,
Yeah.
but like if you want to unlock that next level of someone, even if they're not on the ace spectrum, like asking about people's personal interests and what get them going is super helpful to figure out a person in general.
Yeah, you're communicating interest and that you're invested in who they are, not just what they can give you. And I think that matters for a lot of people. Like I've been doing an experiment for a video I'm working on about different dating apps, and I realized how impossible it is to know whether or not you like someone when the information you're getting is like 3 sentence fragments about like I go crazy for tacos and I'm obsessed with my cat, and I'm like that's great. I don't know anything about you though. Like, I guess we're gonna start a conversation about tacos. Like, it's really hard to like know if you like someone and to get to know them when you're not really being given a lot of information or don't really have opportunities to share that. So,
Have you ever
yeah, just
seen Love is Blind?
I see a little bit of it, but not a lot. I'm
I
familiar with it though.
I need an entire Love is Blind with just like demisexual or asexual people,
Yes.
because I just want
Mhm.
to see how people given no like visuals of someone and just talking to someone and just hearing
Mhm.
the cadence of their voice or what they're interested. Like I feel like I don't know if that would be more successful or less successful for asexual people, because Love is Blind is essentially two people on a a wall that you can't see the person. You're just talking. And these people are
Mhm.
going dates upon dates upon dates for hours just talking about stuff. And then
Mhm.
they get to choose to date that person out in the real world. And if they get married or not, like it's a wild show. But you are physically like, you can't see a damn thing about this person
Mhm.
until you meet them after God knows how many hours of just talking and talking and
Mm.
talking.
I would wonder, I'm like, are they close enough that you can smell them? Because I feel like that matters to a lot of
Oh,
people.
I
Like,
don't
can you
think
smell their
they are.
cologne?
I don't think they are. And they probably try if there was a good test of like with like zero variables that they could control, it would probably be a smellless room, but I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I haven't been on the set yet.
Yeah. Do they eat dinner? Like, is it like a date where they eat dinner on like each side of a panel? Like,
No, I don't think so.
that
I
would be
don't think
funny
so.
though.
I don't
They
think
each
so.
get they're at a table in an Italian restaurant. There's just a wall in the middle of their table. They're both having like carbonara or whatever. Like,
Love is not only blind, apparently on that show, Love is also very hungry. They don't get any food.
they don't get any food. Wow. Wow. I'll have to watch it. I've seen a lot of people react to it. Like I've seen YouTubers I watch like do reactions
Oh, it's
videos
unhinged.
to it, but I've never watched it.
Eh,
The only dating show
yeah.
I've ever watched is Are You the One? I think is what it's called. And they actually have a really good season that's all queer people, but the idea is basically they do like a matchmaking test and then they stick, I think it's like 20 people together in a house, and you have to spend the weeks that they're there figuring out who your perfect match is according to the matchmaker's score. I don't think there's been very many successful relationships out of that, but it's always super entertaining, and the season that's I think it's all bisexuals is the best one. If you're gonna watch a season of the show, that's the one I would go with because it's top tier.
Okay. I forget what point we were on about.
Oh, I don't know. We just started talking about dating stuff. Let's so this is very different. We did talk about demisexuality just being picky, which was actually the third one I had. So we just naturally wove that in there. But number 4 is asexuality is a disorder or a hormone issue. So if you talk about being ace, especially if you talk about ace and having anything medical happen, even if it's totally unrelated, people will be like, well, but have you gotten your hormones checked? Have you checked out your thyroid? Could it be cancer? Like, something must be wrong with you because wanting sex is so natural that not focusing your life around it must mean something's wrong with your brain that needs to be inspected.
But what if I'm just happy doing my own thing and maybe I don't want to have sex? I don't know. Like disorder to me, obviously, we know like disorder is when something is getting in the way of your life and your happiness and your quote unquote normalcy. If my life and happiness and normalcy is just, I might jerk off every once in a while, but I really don't want to have sex. Like,
Mm.
look how much time I'm saving and I'm able to do on other things that make me happy, Like
Mhm.
if that is causing you distress though, you're like, I wish I had more sexual energy, then it can be something that might be a disorder. But that's because
Mhm.
you want something that you're not able to attain, not able to have. Um, hormone issues obviously are a real thing. But again, that's where you should be getting a regular checkup anyway. Get your testing done, regularly. If this is
Yeah.
what you need for a reminder, have you gotten tested recently? Not you specifically, Evie, but I just mean like
Yeah.
people listening.
Yeah. Always a good idea to get tested. It's always just everything across the board. Like especially if you've never had one done before, it's good to have a baseline to check from for sure. And I think on the one hand, it's funny that people feel entitled to like have access to the medical information. Like, well, I'm only going to consider your identity to be valid if you've had the blood test to prove it. Like, no other orientation, as far as sexual orientation is concerned, like has this requirement of like you got to get your blood tested, which is interesting because I imagine at some point, maybe in the past, that might have been true. Like, oh, if you're a lesbian, that must mean that you have something wrong with your hormones, so you should go get them checked. I imagine that could have been more a thing, back in the day, but now it's pretty much just like ace people that are subjected to this, like, have you're crazy, you need to go get your blood looked at and see what's going on. No one else expects that for anything else. But also, usually if there's some kind of pronounced change in a person's hormones, it's something that they're like aware of because of their symptoms to go along with it. And like it's fine to get tested if you think something's a problem, but if it's not interfering with your life, it's not distressing you, like you talked about, then like, that's all that really matters is like, well, is it getting in the way of you having a happy life? Or are there other like health issues going on that maybe you're concerned with? Um, it's just it's silly. Let people like it's infantilizing in a way because it's sort of like you're acting like the parent being like, you're sick, you need to go to the doctor. And it's like, well, it's kind of up to them because they're an adult and like they get to decide for themselves whether or not it's a big enough problem to go to the doctor. And a lot of ace people, especially ace women that I know, have had a lot of issues with doctors insisting on like unnecessary testing. Like, it's once you get to a certain age, it's very hard, especially as an ace woman who's not had vaginal sex, to like convince a doctor to not give you a pregnancy test. Like, it's like I've never, like, this is not me saying this, but like, I've never had vaginal sex before. Doctors like, but I need to give you a pregnancy test. But I'm not but I've never done the thing that makes that like possible. And it's just like people they don't know how to process it. They're like, well, but
are you sure? We should
do it anyway.
Maybe you just need to have a straight sex to figure out if you are a gay or not. Like it very much gives me that same kind of energy.
Yeah, it definitely goes along with that too. There's definitely that like corrective angle of, oh, well, you're ace or you're demi or, insert orientation here because you just haven't had the right kind of sex yet with the right person. And when you do, this whole new world's going to be unlocked and you're going to see how wrong you were and that I was right. And it's like, I don't know.
I don't need that like magic carpet ride. Thank you.
Yeah, there's this desire to be like correct about someone else's orientation and like prove it to them that they're wrong, that I find to be very interesting. Like, why are you so invested in this person's sexual orientation? Like, why do you care this much?
Usually, in my own experience, like they want it and they can't have it, and therefore that makes them angry and they need to lash out via actuallys, and or have you tried? Yeah, and it's that projection.
Yeah. Oh my god, have you just tried blank is. That's always everywhere. It's like, well, I know that you're saying you have this problem. Have you just tried turmeric? Have you just tried?
Oh, it wasn't seasoned right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the sense of like people that are like, oh, here's my old wives' tale like fix for this. Whenever I've had issues, I just have a hot cup of water with lemon in the morning, and that'll definitely fix you right up.
Just need more horny goat weed. That's what you need. Yeah.
Yeah. You just had was like maca root or whatever, the cacao, all the different things. Just put them in a smoothie. It'll fix your asexuality. So the next one, and I'm not sure how familiar with this you are, is about queer platonic relationships and / relationships between two asexual people are basically just friendships. You're just roommates. You're not really dating. They're not like a special relationship in the way that, maybe a heterosexual or a sexual romantic relationship is.
So, I mean, and I don't, as a hot take, like they're saying that queer ace people can't be more than friends. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Like you can literally be ace people and be married and they're going to be like, no, it's just a friendship. You just almost in sort of a like, you're sullying the sanctity of like marriage or calling something a relationship because, well, you're not boinking. And so that must mean that, your relationship isn't really that special. You're damaging the meaning of what this is to other people.
I mean, to that, I would very easily just be like, okay, but asexuality people can also be kinky. Like, does that mean they're not being kinky because they're asexual and therefore you're sexual? And no. I mean, obviously that's a hot take, but also incorrect that because asexual people could be in a relationship. Not only do they both understand each other probably better than any other person who experiences sex because they're on the same spectrum of some kind, but they're at least able to be like, oh, I see that I'm over here in my own nice asexual world. Your asexual world, while not the same, maybe could be similar, and therefore I'm able to draw parallels that allow for you to also be like, oh, my sex works this way, your sex works that way. And I think that's also like the strongest lesson that you can give someone that might not be like quote unquote kinky is being like, well, this person is into said thing that makes them feel super hypersexual or hyper focused this way. You might not consider kink, but the same way you might look at insert type of sex act that's quote unquote normal, but that you only focus on that sex act, that could be kind of kinky, right? Like drawing those parallels in very complex sexual aspects of our lives, but making it very dumbed down to it's a thing that you're really, really into, you know, I think helps people
Mm,
to understand how someone else's experience might be valid. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Yeah, like, I think it's about, like, being able to find the ways you can relate to other people's experiences even when you don't share them,
Yeah.
and
Well, it's
some
like
people
I'm sure you as an educator also get this.
mm,
Like whenever you're trying to like put together a topic or a concept, you have to find the least common denominator or like the
yeah.
stupidest way to say something so that anybody picking up your video, you know, the Mr. Beast, like, today we're going to explode 10 million bugs and blah, $1 million. Like you have to give them
Yeah.
the bare bones at the beginning, slap them in the face with the concept and topic, and then you can elaborate and make more complicated. Well, what about two demi people? What about two
Yeah.
aromantic people versus the sexual people? Like
Yeah.
that's where you break it down. But
Mhm.
at its very core, just because someone doesn't want sex does not mean they can't be in a relationship.
Yeah.
You know, that's
Yeah,
so silly.
exactly. There's not a reason why you can't, like, and actually, as we'll see, this is a position where ace people can't win. There's another particular individual that has some very famous hot takes about ace people we're gonna talk about. And it's like, okay, well, two ace people are in a relationship. They're not really in a relationship, but then also some people think that ace people should only date each other because it's unfair to non-ace people to date them because you're trapping them, and that's bad. So it's like you can't. It's like I guess ace people just don't get to. You're disqualified from having relationships to some people if you're
Mhm.
ace. It's very sad. I'll just get the last general one here we haven't touched on yet, which is ace people are afraid of or hate sex. Like they're grossed out by it. It's icky.
I'm
If
sorry.
you're
Can you
ace,
what
it's
word?
because
We're
you're
afraid of
like
what?
we're afraid of sex.
Ah!
Yeah, I know. Sorry, whoops, I didn't. Oh, I gotta put a warning before I mention the word sex, so that way ace people don't get freaked out. I know it's so serious. It's such a scary word. Yeah, there's definitely a belief that I think actually this goes into some of the more common like characters that people believe are ace. Oftentimes they assign them as being ace because like they have maybe either trauma around sex or they seem to be like repulsed by sex. It's like, oh, it's icky, it's gross, it's bad, I don't want to do it. And that's not like to me the only way to experience asexuality is by like, oh, sex is icky and gross and bad.
I for me, like sometimes sex is really cool and hot and fun. Other
Hmm.
times it's like, it's never gross for me, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people that are repulsed by sex. Like
Hmm.
they're not into it. But for me, I've never had a trauma around sex. I think for me as a sex worker, I used to do sex work full time.
Hmm.
I don't have a revulsion or even a repulsion for sex, but more so I've done enough of the sex acts and the types of fun kink extracurriculars that
Hmm.
kind of helped me weed out. I don't really like that, or I don't really need that,
Hmm.
or I'm having fun sex with all these different kinds of guys, and in my case, but I'm
Hmm.
finding that the best sex I have is with someone that I can like before we've even had any kinky times, been able to talk about, you know, some anime or video games or my
Hmm.
hyperfixation or YouTubers that I was watching. Like that, for whatever reason, caused closeness with these people that then turned into
Hmm.
really nice sex, both in scene, maybe when we're getting paid, but also outside of it. And that was kind of how
Hmm.
I navigated my deminess, was like being like, oh, well, I know that I'm gay. I like this sex, but this is how I've navigated and found the things I like and don't like. This seems right to me. And
Yeah.
that's my own right to do, you know, as anyone can and should. Exploring is very paramount to figuring out what you like.
Yeah, yeah, it's like you gotta yeah, I mean, but it shouldn't be because someone else from the outside is like, in order to identify this way, you have to have done this checklist of things that I think you should do. But certainly can help you understand things better when you've gone through those experiences. And at least people definitely have a spectrum of relationships to there's just a whole there's spectrum on spectrums of asexuality. Like you can both be ace and like be favorable towards sex. You can be neutral about it. You can be repulsed by it. You can have a variable relationship to it depending on, the context or just over time your feelings about it can change. Like definitely when I was younger, I wouldn't say I was fully repulsed by it where I couldn't tolerate it at all, but I was more towards that. I was on the other side of neutral, like towards being disgusted by it. But through being able to look at it at a lens of like, curiosity, education, wanting to learn more about it and understand it, that really helped me get to a more, I would say, neutral position on it, where it's like, it's not really gross, but I'm also not going to say that like genitals are like universally beautiful to me, or that like I desire to look upon them. Like they're fine. They're there. They're, it's like anything else. It's like, well, I don't really think that like, people's ears are like attractive. And that's like basically how I feel about genitals. Like they don't gross me out, but they're not like, ooh, tell me more.
See, same. That's why I love watching streamers, because none of them show their ears while they're playing games.
Oh yeah. No, it's all good if you're not into ears. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some hot takes here about asexuality. And there's actually, just to shout this out, I did a video last year during Pride that was I think, I cannot remember how to pronounce her name. I think it's Yasmin. Yasmin Beno, she is a really, really big ace advocate from the UK. And she's done a lot of work over there for like legal recognition of asexuality. And last year, people got real up in arms because she dared to go to Pride with an ace flag, as like, I think she was even an invited representative to that particular Pride event. And she was wearing like leather and had on like a little, like a chest harness thing for like, for fashion to look cool. She also does like modeling and stuff as well. And people were like so upset about it. And there was like people being like, what do you mean you have equal rights? Like you're not legally required to have sex. Like I talked about all of that in another video, but there's even a more of a history. Basically, whenever she does anything, someone comes out of the woodwork to be like, actually, or like, that's kind of cringe. And people who are on Twitter will probably be familiar with this individual. Graham Linehan, who in yesteryear used to be a fairly well-known creator of TV shows, especially in the UK, that were quite popular, but in more recent times has become a full-time freak on Twitter. I think that's his full-time job, is just like talking about his main fixation is trans people. Like he's a really big like, I hate trans people. They're trying to steal our children. They're lesbians are disappearing because trans women aren't allowed to just or trans men, I guess, are stealing our lesbian sisters. Like it's a whole thing. I really recommend for people's mental health they not engage like very deeply in Graham's Twitter. It's something of an honor to be called out by him. I have been subtweeted by him before. I've been retweeted by him. I think actually for Pride last year, he insinuated I was a danger to children because I'm a kinky asexual person. So he's an equal opportunity hater, honestly. He's just like, trans people are the focus, but he dallies, in all different spaces. But a couple years ago, actually, not for Pride, but for October last year, he when Yasmin was on a press circuit talking about advocating for legal recognition of asexuality, Graham quote tweeted her to say, Siri, show me someone with so few problems they have to make them up. And that's like one of the big through lines you see whenever, especially more far right or conservative or like turfy advocates find ace people doing something. Their favorite thing is to be like, you don't even have any problems. Why are you complaining? Like it's such a boomer thing. I don't know. Like
if something is not present, like for instance, a sexual drive, like that for whatever reason, because it's not a tangible thing that quote unquote exists, therefore it can't be a problem. I mean, there's so many things within our world that like if you didn't have it, it would still be a problem. But like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a really easy one. Like if you can't distinguish colors or you are colorblind, that imagine someone being like, oh, you can't see colors. Oh, that's a problem that we should worry about. Like that's so not only dehumanizing, but so disregarding of someone's actual issue, which is like, I exist. Here's who I am. And asexuality is not a problem to be an asexual. That's just how you are, you know? But yeah, it's such a weird take.
It is funny in a way because they don't really know what she's advocating for. So they're just kind of commenting on it. But what she is advocating for is explicitly like, I want asexuality to be recognized so it can be included in anti-discrimination policies. And meanwhile, we've got people that are giving the perfect example of like discriminating against ace people, which is like, oh, baby, you don't have any real problems, so you're pretending you have some. Oh, like it's like, speaking of discrimination, because clearly, I think it makes sense for any orientation to be protected against specific discrimination by employers or by the government or by healthcare. Like, I know that it happens because I know many people that it happens to. Like we talked about with medical interventions, doctors and nurses, either insisting on unnecessary testing or, not taking certain concerns seriously because of somebody's orientation or what have you. So yeah, it's just also I find it funny, people around the world just getting mad at like somebody. Now, I think Graham's actually in the UK, but we had lots of people from the US getting mad at her advocating for recognition in the UK, which is like, I mean, talk about people not having problems. You know how you have so few problems, you're complaining about Twitter for a legal thing that doesn't even impact you or your country. Like, what's
Or
like,
even the people that like, well, just get off your antidepressants. It'll be fine.
oh yeah, that one.
You're going to be
I love that.
fine. You just have too many drugs in your system. Stop taking drugs. The problem is you take drugs. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And it's like they try to find the problems for us when it's not a problem. The problem is you guys not even recognizing that we can exist, in this space.
Yeah.
And I realize that it's a complicated issue to understand. You as a person who might, I'm speaking broadly, you who experience sexual attraction or energy to things can't imagine the lack of that. And I feel for you if you can't understand the lack of that thing, but that like it's not a problem having inclusion for people. Including other people and things does not exclude you and your experience, We see this kind of argument in all sorts of things, not only trans issues, but women's issues, like queer issues. Because you're including other people, non-binary people, trans people, that does not then take away the experience that you have as a gay person or a bi person or a lesbian or, like your queerness is not better or worse than another person's queerness. It's just your own experience. And the same thing with sex. Like, why are we disengaging from or belittling someone's experience? That has nothing to do with you. And in some cases, quite the opposite kind of experience, And it's frustrating to see. But thank God for, how do you pronounce her last name? Because I had not heard of her before.
I think it's Beno. I think it's Beno. I'll insert a clip of her saying her own name probably somewhere in here just to make sure. But I think it's Beno.
I'm Yasmin Benoit. I'm a model and aromantic asexuality activist from Reading, Berkshire.
She's gorgeous. Yeah, good for her. Let's go.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's also for people who are listening to this or haven't seen her before. She is a Black woman, so there is a level of like misogynoir going on here. There's like a lot of intersecting things that make people particularly angry online because I don't really see people going after male asexual advocates to this level, and certainly not white male asexual advocates to this level. And there are many of them, and they deal with their own issues. But it's more like people, review bombing their Goodreads for their book about asexuality, and not reposting a photo of them to make fun of it to their 1 million conservative Twitter followers. So. Yeah, it's a different level there. But the last person I want to talk about, and I could do a whole video about this guy, is Dan Savage, whose work I have not engaged in too much, but he's had a column probably for what, like 20 years, 30 years, maybe a long time. He's had like an advice column about sex, and in that time he shared some less than stellar thoughts about asexuality and demisexuality. I will say a couple of years ago, and I'll just read this kind of verbatim for people. He went back and sort of said that his opinions about asexuality have changed, although it seems like if it has changed, it's been a very recent development. So what he said more recently is, I used to be a male bisexuality skeptic, and now I'm a believer in male bisexuality. Improvement. Good. I was dubious about asexuality when that first began to be really kind of publicly addressed and discussed. And now, I get it. Asexuality is a sexual orientation and a valid one, an important one for people to talk about so that people who are asexual don't feel like they're broken, so they can name it and know who they are. So that is fantastic. But he's sort of known in the ace community for years, like over a decade probably, of repeating the same take over and over again. And the most recent example of it is from like 2013, 2015, I think. So he had this thought for a pretty long amount of time. And it was essentially that ace people should not date non-ace people. And that they have to disclose it like immediately on a date. So this is like one example of him saying that is, I'll probably be accused of asexophobia, which is like not the term that we normally use. Acephobia is normally the term that's used, just for anyone wanting to look that up.
I've never heard that before.
I think he just made it up. Like, he's like, oh, asexophobia, that's not even a real thing. For suggesting that asexuals who date sexual people are obligated to disclose their asexuality, preferably on the first date and certainly no later than the third date, because, sex has to happen by the third date, I guess, is that reason for that benchmark. Asexuals may have the same emotional needs as anyone else, but most of us sexuals, heterosexuals, homosexuals, bisexuals, expect to have our emotional and sexual needs met in our intimate romantic relationships. Thanks. And we're going to want to know if that's not on the cards before we get involved, not after. Someone who is incapable of meeting asexuals' needs as an asexual person has no business dating asexual in the first place. If you ask me, at the very least, asexuality must be disclosed, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. So he said it, and that's like one of the more pleasant ways that he said that. But over the decades, he's said basically that like it's wrong for an ace person to date a non-ace person because you're not going to be able to meet certain expectations.
I just really love the confusion of saying asexual people and a sexual person, because like the way that's phrased in there, it makes more sense when you read it. Without the proper pause, it's so confusing. Now, granted, that was a decade ago, and I know that Dan's gone on his bad takes with bisexuality, trans issues, and I've even heard the asexual ones. Maybe not so much recently, but there's a kind of almost. I do feel bad at times for those of us who came before us when in the sexual realms trying to speak on sex topics, because back in my day when I was first getting started on the YouTubes, I didn't have the proper terminology for trans people. I'd never crossed paths with someone who was trans in over a decade ago when I was just even getting started in the sexual realm. And that opened my eyes a lot. I've met Dan a number of times and he's always been very pleasant. I've even had conversations with him around demisexuality. And he doesn't know how to always grasp it because he hasn't experienced that. And that's case in point, like what we're talking about is like trying to explain a thing that doesn't have terminology, quote unquote, doesn't quote unquote exist. Like we know asexuals existed back in the 70s and 80s when people started talking about sex. They didn't have the words for it, They didn't have the terminology for it. So while Dan says some real stupid shit quite often especially a decade or two ago, I'm always going to be the first one to be like, yeah, but have you learned before I'm going to attack someone? Yeah. And with Dan, like, I think he's come around on a lot of things and it's really just taken having a proper conversation. But to that point, like if you have people in your life that are acephobic or asexophobic, as Dan would have put it, like sometimes it really does take that conversation. If you have the compassion, you have the time and the bandwidth to really educate someone who does legitimately care, it helps so much to then have other people in your corner. Again, I can't speak for Dan, but like to those people that are trying to figure it out and aren't trying to be acephobic and are really just trying to be like, well, you don't like sex, right? Or you don't want sex with me. Don't waste your time. Some of us have that bandwidth. Some of us do like the sex. Some of us do want to have that relationship that might not always include sex, but that doesn't mean we don't care and we're not human, At the end of the day, if I were trying to create something educational around someone's sexuality, even if that's not my personal stance on something, I would hope that I was at least open to hearing people's perspectives And understanding the human experience is so different and so vast and so complicated, you
Mm,
know? And so when I
yeah,
see that, that makes me upset for that person who might not have the bandwidth or even the emotional understanding to see my perspective as a demi person. But that doesn't
mm.
mean that I want to be like, you're the worst person in the world, you know?
Yeah, I think it's always good to start from a place of empathy, both as the person who is trying to understand other people's orientations, as well as the person who has that orientation that is dealing with people that don't get it. Because I think there's a way of not understanding it that's like, oh, you just haven't heard of it before. You're just trying to understand it better. And, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you mean well, but not everyone means well, and doesn't mean that you should pour energy into them because, oh, they could be better. But, I have to just keep trying to beat them over the head until they agree. Like, gotta know where to put your energy. But I think it's good to at least start from a place of like, I am not saying you're a bad person. I'm not saying that like you're doing something terrible, but like let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it if you feel like you have room to do that. And I'm interested in this because there was something he said about demisexuals, and you said you had conversations with him about it.
Mhm.
And this was like right around the time he had that same interview where he said that he was no longer a skeptic about asexuality. And I'm like, okay, explain this then. So he had said, I'm old enough to remember when people who needed to feel a strong emotional connection before they wanted to fuck someone got by without a word or a pride flag of their very own. That to me does not sound particularly supportive of ace or demi people, but
No, not at all.
maybe he met one person a month after this and was like, that makes sense. I get it now. Who knows?
As a again, I'm a gay cis demi guy, you know. So gay is
Mhm.
always going to be my default that I go to because that's the easiest
Mhm.
thing for people to jump off of. But then I've got my ace flag in my background, and there is a demi flag, but like the
Mhm.
ace flag incorporates and encapsulates that as well.
Mhm.
I'm not going to make excuses for people who put things in writing because I can't. Again,
Yeah.
that was in 2020 or something like that.
Yeah, it was 2020. It was like
Yeah, I mean,
March.
I don't feel attacked by Dan even with that because in my mind, I laugh when people are like, "We need a flag for all of this."
Yeah.
I exist, you know. I'm able to fight for myself and speak for myself. But if that flag gives someone who is not able to speak for themselves a place of feeling like belonging, who the fuck cares
Mhm.
if that person wants a flag for themselves? You know. Again,
Yeah.
this is the inclusion conversation of like that person feeling
Mm.
included does not then exclude me from my own personal ace spec sense. You know, my own personal gayness.
Mhm.
And I really like given the options here, I would much rather have a debate and a conversation with a Dan Savage over like a gram, you
Oh,
know.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Like
Graham's not debatable. His head is, like, about 10 miles under the sand. There's no getting through to that man. He's gone. But Dan, I think, is maybe more capable of change, but yeah, it's for me, like,
still
the
giving
repres
phobias, absolutely.
yeah, he needs some work, but I think it's something that is if he's willing to process it, that's good. And for me, um, the inclusion aspect of everyone needs their own pride flag these days. Like the way that I think about that is like I don't necessarily need a pride flag, but I can't ignore the fact that it has been meaningful to me when my community shows support explicitly for asexuality. Like when I see a convention, like a kink convention, explicitly include, in their statement about their mission or what their aim is for the convention, they list asexuality alongside, you know, gay people, lesbian people, bisexuals, pansexuals. Like to see ace in that is like they know about us. We're here. Like they like it's like being acknowledged from invisibility is like very powerful. Not because I like need to have the ace pride flag right next to the rainbow flag, but it's like they're aware that we're even here, and that means a lot. Like this just to even be acknowledged and not like, put in the yada yada of the plus next to the LGBT plus,
Yeah.
I know that means a lot to other people too to see, like for example, with a lot of conventions, they fly the pride flags, in the entryway area as you're going into the convention, and to see that there alongside the other, the leather pride flag or the bear pride flag or whatever, it's like yeah, we're there too. Like, and
The
that
bear pride
feels
flag
nice.
always gets extra love, which I always
Yeah.
the bear pride flag's almost always there with the leather and the other
Yeah.
queer flags, and I don't never know why, but I love to see it.
I think it's people like the aesthetic of it. I feel like it's a very like pleasing color palette for people. It stands out a lot as well.
Well, that and it has intentionally, like the bear pride flag has the different colored skin tones, like the different browns and peaches and like skin tones on there is intentionally done to incorporate all people, all races.
Yeah,
And they
which
should get
is
points for that.
yeah, which is a nice message. Like I think that's something that is nice to include as well, is that like message of inclusivity across multiple dimensions of experience. But yeah, asexuality is valid, I think, is the the point we learned today.
And actually, as a good segue,
Yeah.
there's also many different kinds of poly flags, which is a
Oh,
conversation we're going to have
yes.
as well in the other part of this, which is talking about polyamory. Because when it comes to inclusion, there were not as many comments on a video upset with me than when the one time we used a poly flag and it wasn't the most recent one. And people were like, "That's not the poly
Oh,
flag. Don't invalidate my experience." And I was just like, "Wait, but no, I'm trying to include you." And like we're all learning. We're all
oh,
learning is the story there, but also that
yes.
there are multiple poly flags.
Yes, there are. There's multiple competing flags. Yes, we'll talk about that. So, if everyone enjoyed this, we're going to have a conversation about polyamory over on. Is it going on the podcast or on the main channel?
It'll probably go on the podcast,
Okay, it'll be a
but
podcast. A podcast? It'll be a podcast?
well, multiple pet players talking about things on an audio cast, I believe, is a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're gonna have a little podcast over talking about the poly podcast with with Amp and Evie. Yeah, we're talking about polyamory because there's been a lot of that in the news as well. There's just been so many conversations. So if you want to hear some of our thoughts about those hot takes, you can go to the link down below when that's available. And yeah, so thank you so much for being here. And I'll have links to your channel, all of the things down below for people to enjoy. If people have thoughts about the flags or the Twitter hot takes or your own hot takes, you can leave those down in a comment down below as well. And thank you all so much for watching. If you want to see more from me, I do make videos like this twice a week about all different topics, from kink to asexuality to queer issues to pop culture news, all sorts of different stuff going on there. And if you want to support me, you can go over to Patreon, where you can see episodes like this early occasionally, not all the time, but I do occasionally put them up early over there, as well as exclusive bonus episodes and so many other things. Go over to patreon.com. And thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, stay safe, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.